I'm always so glad to have you tune in and watch Around the Town with Mark. I have another great show going on today with a very interesting guest. He's a naval historian and he's going to talk to us about all things related to our history of the military in our area as well as the industry associated with that. So, allow me to introduce my guest, Ryan C. Walker. Ryan, welcome back to Around the Town with Mark.
Thank you for having me. I
We,
appreciate
we
it.
just had you recently on to promote your wonderful book, which I hope a lot of people are going out, buying, and reading because it's fascinating. I've been reading it and I'm loving it.
Thank you.
So, again, introduce yourself to our audience and start talking about what you're here for today.
Absolutely, Mark. My name is Ryan C. Walker, and today I'm discussing my chapter in a book called Sea Power by Other Means. I submitted a call for paper in while I was actually a master's student, and this one became a very personal one. And really what it came down to is a question that was in my head as I flew out from Great Lakes Recruit Training Station to Providence, and like, why am I going to Groton, Connecticut?
Okay.
So my question revolved around what exactly brought the submarine base here and what brought the industry here that we have come to appreciate and respect and call ourselves the submarine capital of the world, with good reason.
I'm very proud of it too, aren't we?
Absolutely. So I looked into it and I found a period between 1868 and 1940 that was pivotal to the development of American naval capital towns. Now I call it a naval capital town, and what that means is it's a community or town or a geographic region that forms an identity and an economic relationship with the military in a way very rarely seen. And if you look at, you hear things talking about, you hear people and pundits talking about the military-industrial complex, and generally that kind of invokes this image of Eisenhower's speech, of shadowy organizations and corrupt officials talking behind back doors. And what I really have come to find as through naval service and continued work in the defense industry, I'm currently at Electric Boat, is the real image of the military-industrial complex should be your friend who works at EB, your dad who was a tradesman and brought you up. It should be the person that actually does the work in the communities that should be the center of the military-industrial complex.
Our friends and our neighbors.
Absolutely. And Groton's unique because submarines are unique. And the question I found was, why Groton? Because in reality, it kind of deviates. Now, I come from the University of Portsmouth, where I got my master's degree, and I'm currently a PhD candidate at. Now, there is a great one from they have a study into sailor towns, and that's a study into the social identity associated with sailor towns.
Okay.
Louise Moon wrote a thesis on it, and I do quote hers on that. But basically, they look into the social side, and I said, well, how did the economic process happen? What drives success in Groton and continues to drive success in Groton? And my argument is there's two primary avenues and conduits for economic investment in the form of naval capital, and that's General Dynamics Electric Boat and the submarine base. Now, the military-industrial complex has a predecessor complex. Now, the predecessor complex in naval history is called the fiscal naval state, and its naval history's response to the military revolution. Now, there are proponents, I don't want to misrepresent this, there are proponents of the military revolution theory in naval history circles, and there are proponents of the fiscal naval state. It's actually an active debate. I personally tend to agree with the proponents of the fiscal naval state.
Okay.
And I do cite quite a few of them. Now, their argument is there was no real revolution, and a lot of them point out there's revolutions everywhere. Everyone wants to say their area, their unique area, had a military revolution that's very similar to the Western one that was used. And the original one was actually covering Sweden from about 1550 to 1650.
Oh, way back.
Yes. So around that same time period, though, you start to see the formation specifically of navies, state navies. And why did they form? Building a ship is one of the most capital-intensive and forward-thinking things you could do in the 16th century. You have to have, for example, HMS Victory required 40 acres of oak trees.
Ooh, wow.
So you had to have that prepared, and it has to be seasoned wood. It can't just be normal wood you chop down. There had to be specific forests that were there to actually build the ship and be chopped down for it, and then prepared for years beforehand.
Wow, fascinating.
So you have to have a lot of administration, you have to have a lot of planning and actually building and maintaining a navy.
Where do they come up with all these ideas?
It takes it, and there's a great quote that's sailors don't fully understand that they are in a ship built with wood from across Europe, with wooden spars designed in wood spar sailing material designed in Norway, and it highlights the intricate network of supplies that need to go in to make a navy successful. So the argument is that if you look at the type of investment and how long it has to happen, that necessitated the state to develop administrative apparatus that actually allowed it to develop and sophisticate. And that only increased once they started using cannons. So you think land regiments, they need cannons too, right? Not at the same level as a first-rate warship. They required hundreds of cannons. The actual rate on a warship was significantly higher compared to just a regiment that needed to travel. Now forts, you can make the argument that the forts were there, but they're very localized. They needed to be self-sustaining. It's the inherent nature of a fort. So due to the nature of having to have networks, far-flung networks to get supplies, then far-flung networks to supply the ships, victual the ships, and when you victual the ships, you have to have water, you have to have rum, you have to have all the food necessary for it, and you need to not only do that in England at that time, you need to do that in the colonies, you needed to do that in India, you needed to do that on the coast of Africa. You have these far-flung supply networks. So their argument is the uniqueness of the military way to wage war the Western way, it came from the navies. And that's where the basis for the military-industrial complex and the fiscal naval state came about. I agree with that. And I actually think that fits in well with the military-industrial complex. And my argument is you should look at towns like Groton. Groton is the center, the submarine center of naval capital towns. Now, that doesn't mean there's nothing happening in D.C. and other areas of administration. There are. But we should shift that from the financial centers, from the business centers, to the place where the actual work gets done and gets channeled as a national effort into submarine construction.
Fascinating, fascinating, fascinating. I'm just amazed at how far back all of this goes. Of course, it had to start somewhere and somehow.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about the state of where we are today and with our military town in southeastern Connecticut and the men and women that do all that work for us, as you say, with Electric Boat and EB, General Dynamics, all of that.
So when I was writing this chapter, which was about 2021, excuse me, in 2020 they had just released a report, the town of Groton and the city of Groton, and they said of the approximately 38,000 people, 20,000 people that worked in the area were associated with either submarine base or Electric Boat. So 65%. That's a huge amount. That's the lifeblood of our town. And you could argue a lot of the connections to the other industries stem from that. Now, we know that was threatened in 2004. Excuse me, with the BRAC closures.
Right, that's right. I forgot about that. Yes.
Though that was, I found quite a few good articles on it that discussed Rob Simmons, Jody Rell, their efforts to try to save it.
That was a scary time. I remember that now. I forgot all about that until you just mentioned it. Yes.
So that fear that everyone felt, that's emblematic of how important it is to keep these things open. And the ties, you look at the other shipyards that were closed, because we're in an era where it's important to try to get shipyards back and make sure they're well staffed. If you were to open one, say, in Mare Island, where there used to be a shipyard, you'd have some difficulty. All those people, they're no longer shipyard savvy. They don't know how to necessarily build submarines or surface ships anymore. They don't know how to maintain them. It would require people from Groton, from Norfolk to move and then further diminish the workforce here.
Tremendous amount of eco-structure and things that have to go into anything like that. It's massive.
So in Groton specifically, the first efforts were put in 1862 during the Civil War. Now, some ships were built here. For example, the ironclad ship, the Galena, was built in Mystic.
Really? Oh, okay. Yep.
So you have an industry here that's maritime based already, and they said, hey, we have this land on the Thames River. They had quotes from experts who said that if for example Napoleon III of France were able to acquire the land, he would build the greatest naval base ever. So the reports they were sponsored by the town of Groton, and they were sponsored by the town of New London. So obviously they really very much appreciate the Thames River. The Navy passed. They actually ended up opening up a shipyard in League Island, which is now Philadelphia. And they didn't stop that. So in 1868, they actually managed to get a success. So they donate the land to the federal government, which was an important key part because the federal government now owns the land. And they decide to build 3 buildings, and they decide to put in a pier, T-shaped pier, and they're going to try to make it a shipyard. Those plans did not receive funding. About 1870, 1868, there's no appetite for spending more military. They had huge debts from fighting the Civil War. There's plenty of things that there are other priorities needed on, like fueling reconstruction. So the shipyard kind of remains dormant. 1888 is a key point in the United States Navy's history. That's when the foundation of the modern steel Navy occurs. So they're starting to see this reinvestment in naval capital towns. Groton was not one of them. They actually end up trying to open up a Marine Corps building. There was actually, in 1907, that was moved to League Island. You're seeing a pattern there, consolidation.
Yeah.
And you're seeing all this naval capital all around. You're seeing Philadelphia successful. You're seeing Newport grow into what it is today, where there's a torpedo station, where there's research stations. You see Nahant, Massachusetts, which has a research station as well. You see Four River Shipyard, Portsmouth, and then there's Connecticut. And they're not sure what to do with it. So they tried closing it on times, and there was actually at the time, representative, he became a senator later, Edwin Higgins.
Okay.
He was from Norwich, Connecticut. And he saw in 1911 and 1912 from Brian Mahan, who was then mayor of New London, that they were trying to shut down the shipyard there. So it was then called the Thames Station.
Okay.
And the Thames Station in 1911, 1912, Higgins vigorously defended, and it was actually successful. And you could directly attribute Edwin Higgins to a reason why we have a shipyard today. So finally, they are looking at these submarines. And actually before that, in 1911, they have a key moment of opportunity. So there was infrastructure in place from the Eastern Shipbuilding Company. They built the 2 largest steamships in 1908, the Minnesota and the Dakota. And as soon as that happened, they went out of business, which was not unusual at the time for firms, especially shipyards. Once they lost their contract, they laid everyone off and said good luck. Frank Cable of Electric Boat was on a search. He was looking for a place to build diesel engines. Now, they'd found gasoline engines were dangerous. They really had fumes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, makes sense.
So as Japanese submarine number 6, the entire crew was asphyxiated.
Ooh.
We actually had the final letters from the commanding officer, Sakamoto.
Oh, really?
Terrifying stuff. Like they were trying their best to save the ship, but they couldn't.
Oh, I had no idea. I hadn't heard of that.
So they found, all right, we need to put diesel engines on.
Right.
So they're looking for a place to build diesel engines. Now, these aren't the diesel engines you know. They're German manufactured. And they were very unreliable, but we'll get to that. The German engines needed a place to be built. So they were looking for a place, and they look at the time, Electric Boat was a contractor. So they would design it, and then they would send it off to someone else, like a shipyard, like Four River Shipyard, and they would build submarines there. They decided, all right, those places don't have enough room. Where are we going to build these things? Well, they found the infrastructure here. He visited, he saw the infrastructure, he saw the depressed workforce, and said, I think we have a place. They ended up buying it in 1911. And they opened up, that's the first imprint of Electric Boat into the town. They were building Nelsico engines, New London Ship and Engine Company. Now, on site, that ended up employing about 1,000 people, which was significant for the town because it was only about 10,000 people.
Yeah, that's...
So you're already starting to see they organized football teams. They were a huge part of the community.
Yeah, sure, yeah. It's
And
a
during
big percentage.
Yeah, absolutely. And during the war years, they were very important for the actual success of the town and the successful war effort execution. So that happened until 1924, when there was some friction between private and public entities that were associated with shipbuilding. 1915 comes around, and in October 1915, they actually move the Monitor along with several submarines at the start of the submarine base New London. And that was chosen because we found Josephus Daniels, the Secretary of the Navy at the time. He was looking for locations. And he saw that they were doing a submarine which had, at the time, 10 to 20 people on board. And said, why are we paying for this submarine tender, which has a crew of 1,200, for 12 submarines that have less than that?
Yeah, yeah.
we need to open up a base. That's just not, it's not feasible to keep paying that money. And there's some interesting history as to they believe whether or not submarines should continue to be mobile or have a home port. We know now they require a home port, and we're able to actually say that with pride that
Certainly.
that Groton is the home of that.
Yeah.
But they managed to get that, and the reason they chose it was because they're like they build the engines right across the river. So without Frank Cable's the decision to build there and actually start those ties, there wouldn't have been potentially a submarine base here. They would have put it probably on League Island like they did everything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're starting to see a pattern. With only one in place, the other wasn't necessarily successful. They're having a feedback loop. And in 1924, that became a problem when the diesel engines were unreliable. So the Nalseco company was General Dynamics in general, their stock price plummeted. They were having issues getting contracts, and the federal government believed that they should only build in federal shipyards. So Portsmouth Naval Shipyard was the great benefactor of that, but they were found to be insufficient for production. So around 1930, they decide, all right, we need to allow private shipyards back in. So they look, Simon Lake's company in Bridgeport, Connecticut, Lake Torpedo Boat, they went out of business. They didn't have any money. They had no contracts. They were always cash strapped, and then when the contracts dried up, they had to go bankrupt.
Right. That's what
However,
works. Yep.
Nalseco scrounged up anything they could. They found, there were ads out, they would answer, Rodingen's book, The Legend of Electric Boat, talks about this in detail. There were ads out like, we'll fix your yacht, which they did do steam engines for yachts as well. So they managed to survive, and then they got the contract for their USS Cuttlefish. And that was the first boat built entirely on site in Groton in 1931.
Really? Okay.
So they were able to say, hey, we need them here. We need them to have money. And the submarine base is right up the river, so they could continue to train them while they're doing it. And over time, we see it develop the feedback loop because a lot of people would stay in the area. Surprisingly, there's a lot of people, sailors especially, there's records of them. We don't have any that are necessarily electric boat, with the exception of one, Lawrence Y. Spear. Spear became the CEO and operator of Electric Boat during World War II. But prior to that, he was one of the main board members, and he had served the United States Navy as an officer. So he had that connection in there too. So we're starting to see a pattern. There's blue-collar workforce. People and sailors are blue-collar at that time. They would get out of the Navy, and they would just transfer over there. Or they would open up their business in town. There's a record of some of them owning bars in town. Like Memoirs, that was the favorite bars of submariners in that period.
Yeah.
So you're seeing the connection, though. Groton received new people in from sailors, from people interested in working on an electric boat. They would then go either leave or stay in the town. Even if that's a small percentage, a lot of people went back home, reasonably so. Even if that's a small percentage, though, you're starting to see new people flood into Groton. You're seeing sailors who spend money. We love to spend money.
Oh, sure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You're starting to see people spend money, and then you're also seeing steady employment for the people that are in town. So over time, my argument is Groton became a naval capital town prior to the Second World War in the 1930s through the efforts of people beforehand, and they had a constant feedback loop of labor and economic activity to ensure that Electric Boat and the New London Submarine Base would be successful.
And over time, one feeds off of the other, and they build and get larger and larger, and you know they're both benefiting, and that's how things grow.
Absolutely. So my next part of the research I'm actually doing for a book called Many Faces of War. It's an annual conference held in South Dakota, and my argument is, all right, so we understand the process now. There needs to be funnels of naval activity and investment. Well, what happens to the network around it? New London and Groton weren't the only towns involved. There were Waterford, Ledyard, Norwich. They were involved. They had companies that benefited from that. So the Thames River Valley became a geographic entity that was well suited to this. Then you have Fort River Shipyard. So the diesel engines were shipped up via rail, transported by rail to Fort River Shipyard, where they were installed. But over time, they got shifted over here. Where did that workforce go? How about the workforce in Bridgeport, Connecticut? Some of them stayed in Bridgeport, but did some of them move to Groton? You also have the torpedoes, which are being built and developed in Newport. You have all of these funnels of activity, economic activity, onto a platform. And that platform is a submarine. So my understanding for this next one is, how did these networks consolidate around Electric Boat, and how far did it go? Because there is an argument to be made that if a submarine built in Groton is stationed out in Guam, all the activities associated with that submarine should transfer over to Guam too.
Okay.
So you're starting to see these networks of connection that they were the same as the age of sail. These deep networks of connection were necessary to actually sustain the submarine force.
Well, one thing, and this may be putting it simply, that our area benefits for, I think, and why we became, as we are, such a big force, is the way our river goes, the Thames River goes. You know, we're open to the sound, but yet you go up where the base is, and it winds around, and it seems to be more protected and sheltered. So that had to play also a major part of why things developed as they did.
Yeah, if you look at the 1862 report, people were bragging about how great the Thames River was for exactly what you're saying. And there was shipyards here up until, I believe, 1725. And 1725, there was a shipwright from Portsmouth, England. Another connection to my school. He came here and he put a shipyard on the banks of Groton. Well, he arrived at New London. He said Groton's the ideal place to do it.
Is the Gold Star Bridge ever a concern from anybody? If somebody took down that bridge,
they actually didn't want it. They actually tried.
I was going to say that
an early environmental movement tried getting it canceled.
Yeah. I would think in some ways, if you look at it, it doesn't make sense to have a bridge of that size cutting the river in half, if you will.
So here's where I get to say thank you to the local historians that are already here. I cite Carol Kimball. I cite Jim Streeter.
Oh yes,
they've done excellent work, and in no way does my work replace it.
Right.
What they've already done for the town of Groton. Now they mentioned especially other towns that benefited, like Waterford across the river in New London. People were coming across the Gold Star Bridge, so that became an artery for labor and for material as well. And a lot of the places, so one of the areas I looked into was local guides. Now, the local guides could not wait to talk about how the state funded local transportation. So you didn't have to worry about that. And that was actually a huge avenue. And I mean, there's a great picture in the Library of Congress in 1940 that really illustrates this. So for the Workers' Progress Administration, they had photographers. One of them was Marion Post Wolcott. And Wolcott was sent across the country to go take pictures of rural and urban life.
Okay.
So first she did it for rural life, and the rural life is Kentucky, what you expect from the Great Depression pictures. But the final one is, and it's really special, is Groton, and it's in 1940, about June 1941, and she's taking a picture of the defense industry in the area. And you could see this long line of traffic, so some things don't change.
Yeah.
We still have that long line of traffic, and it shows just how important Gold Star became, because it's all because of Gold Star paying the toll at the time.
Okay, yeah.
How important it became to ensure that the ability for people to travel into Groton became a thing.
Well, it's fascinating to me, and I remember, I'm dating myself, but back in the 60s, there was a submarine tender on the other side of the bridge, over by where the train station is, and my uncle was served on one of those submarine tenders, so that's gone now.
It was there till the 90s, actually, and the Naval Undersea Warfare Center was there too at Fort Trumbull.
Okay.
And they gave that to the Coast Guard afterwards, and that got moved to Rhode Island.
Okay.
So you still see the connection. We're heavily connected to Newport. Newport's success is connected to our success. Portsmouth Naval Shipyard's success is connected to our success. You're seeing the networks that exist, while they're naval capital towns and worthy of discussion in their own right, they are still successful as much as their investment is, and as much as their connections to other areas are.
Do you have any ideas to when Groton started to be called the submarine capital of the world, and who kind of brought that into?
I was looking it up, and the Groton Public Library, I went in there, I went to their archives. There's not really too many terms on that.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, there was no submarine capital of the world, but they really started investing heavily into Groton. This is kind of tangential to the research, but in 1960s, I found a document they were planning for the area of Groton, so Groton itself, Groton to Mystic, to have 100,000 people by the year 2000. So it was around that time they start marketing themselves as a submarine town.
Okay.
And what they're saying is they're like, look, you have the 41 for freedom, the boomers, the old boomers that used to come out. Now we have the Tridents that are in
Yep.
St. Mary's, Georgia, and in Bremerton, Washington, so Bangor, Washington. And they shifted that out. They shifted some of the investment from here to different areas. There used to be 20,000 people that were employed at Electric Boat in Groton in 1991. They had to lay off heavily. It went down to a real trough, I think, in 2008 of 6,500 people. We're back up to these high numbers, but you're starting to see something. We need to rebuild those networks. We need to rebuild the shipyard savvy people. And because really what happened is it leveled out the workforce until the investment could catch up. The EB survived, and we're thankful for it. I certainly am. I love Connecticut, and I love staying there. But EB went through some hard years around the BRAC year closures. And really what I argue is you got to rebuild the connections with the base. Because a lot of people who were stationed on the base at that time, they saw what happened to Electric Boat. They saw what happened to the other shipyards. They had to do a lot of layoffs after the Cold War.
I grew up in Groton back in the 60s, and my family, everyone had some kind of relationship with the base or with Electric Boat and all that. But Groton was a much smaller town back then. People don't look at it or think about it that way, but even though the submarine base was as big as it is in Electric Boat, the town of Groton really was quite small.
Yeah, it was about 12,000 people, and that's after it doubled in size during the Second World War.
Fascinating. Well, we're down to about 2 minutes. Tell me, what have I not asked you, or what would you like to close out the show with? Any thoughts or comments about your chapter and where to find this book and all those kind of good things?
So the book is Sea Power by Other Means. You can find it on the publisher's website, and the editor is Jay Overton. That's the primary means. I also have it on my specific chapter in the Academia site, where you look up Ryan C. Walker. But I'd like to say thank you to the people of Groton. You guys made this work successful and continue to make this work successful and continue to make this conversation poignant, because Groton, I really cannot stress enough, submarine construction here is the lifeblood of the submarine force. And we can never lose sight of how important that is to the country. And we should be proud of that. We should be walking around saying we are the submarine capital of the world. And I appreciate not only you, but your ancestors and everyone who worked here beforehand.
Excellent. Well, Ryan, I want to thank you very much for being my guest today and previously to promote your book. I hope people are going out to buy that book and will read your chapter in this book as well. But again, you've been a great guest, and thank you for being on the Round the Town with Mark. And I want to thank my viewers for tuning in today, Round the Town with Mark. And we're going to have another great show coming up for you real soon. Make sure to check out Ryan C. Walker's books and stay tuned for another show coming up real soon. Take care, and we'll see you.